Ukraine today succeeded in carrying out one of the largest military operations imaginable since February 2022, since the moment when Russia entered Ukrainian territory. The explanation, very precise, first of all, of
what we see here. So we are inside a drone that is remotely piloted, and the fact that it is remotely piloted means that it is connected to the local Russian telephone network. So already, technically, that means they started from Russian territory and not missiles coming from far away from Ukrainian territory.
And they are plugged into the network.
Russian local phone networks were used for drones as seen in images shared by Ukrainians. There is no standardized system. These small drones can't be connected by satellite, such as Starlink, due to their size. We can recognize the targets they're hitting here. So we simply have the strategic planes, the Tupolev 95 bombers lined up one after another. And the Ukrainians are reporting 41 planes destroyed or damaged. Based on available evidence, there are already 5 Tupolev 95s, 2 Tupolev 22s, and 2 Tupolev 160s. Strategic bombers are armed against Ukraine and can also carry nuclear weapons, making them a threat on an international level.
This image is incredible. We're discussing a nuclear power that was historically one of the two great superpowers, which is being attacked on its own territory and on one of its most strategic fleets.
Yes, it's a considerable slap in the face. The Russians have about 110 strategic bombers. Incidentally, they are no longer being manufactured, so those that are lost for good. And in reality, this also undermines their nuclear strike capability, their nuclear strikes, their nuclear capability. The issue extends beyond warheads to include launches and delivery systems like bombers constituting a strike. It's a kind of drone-based operation, which is extraordinarily complex, since it's also carried out simultaneously in 5 different locations. At the same time, with a penetration inside Russian territory, with all the difficulty of actually getting inside the territory, including very far in, to bring them there by truck. All these drones to operate them on site, and then the last thing, to withdraw as well. The biggest difficulty, at least in this kind of operation, is that once the alarm is raised, it's to withdraw. And apparently all the teams that were on site managed to do it. Isn't that due to local complicity? Maybe, probably.
The plan involves over 40 nuclear-capable bomber planes attacking railway bridges. We'll address that immediately. Close to Ukraine, 2 trains that derailed and possibly an organized attack near Murmansk. It seems to be a massive military operation involving air, sea, and land forces simultaneously.
Yes, it's a complex operation, even if the means used, like small first-person view drones, may seem rudimentary in the end. But the overall organization is very complicated, since there are simultaneous base operations, destruction of bridges and sites with particular difficulties. To destroy an infrastructure, you need to bring a lot of explosives, and that's something else entirely. There, it's not just a few small drones you need to bring. It's tons of explosives that have to be delivered, that have to be brought inside Russian territory to destroy something important. And all of that simultaneously, I have to say, without any hitch. Apparently nobody got caught. The plan was carried out flawlessly.
In secrecy that lasted for months.
The 18 months of preparation, it's a very large-scale operation and truly remarkable. By the way, you'll notice that this isn't the first, it's actually the most important of the Ukrainian deep operations. But there have been others since then. In the past, base sabotages and various attacks have occurred, but never the opposite. In other words, the Russians are inept, despite past hype about the Spetsnaz and their infiltration skills. They have been unable so far to do the equivalent on Ukrainian territory.
A word of comment, Xavier Teitelman, on this.
The base in Olenaya is one of Russia's most strategic, hence its relatively distant location. Because with missiles that could go 200 to 300 kilometers, they had to pull back their strategic aviation to a place where they thought they were out of range. The fact is that the Ukrainians, by firing from their own territory, are able to hit up to 400 kilometers of range, but with payloads that are relatively light, 30 to 40 kilograms, and without any video feedback. That is to say, it's a kind of missile, and you can see it on a geographic position. And what if the Russians moved their plane between the time they launched it and the time it arrived? 6 to 8 hours indeed, it's not going to hit the target. The key difference is that these strategic planes, lined up with missiles, were already positioned and prepared for takeoff, to be able to terrorize the Ukrainians this evening. And so they succeeded by guiding them all the way to impact. To really know that they weren't just hitting an empty parking lot, but that they were actually hitting the planes. And that's why, with only about 15 or so small kamikaze drones dedicated to each of these bases, they managed to hit 8, 10, 12 planes on each base.
with destruction that we have proof of. And I have a question, Xavier.
How is it that such strategic equipment as these bombers aren't protected by drone jammers?
Like they are on the front lines? There's something even simpler. Why aren't they in concrete shelters?
Simply
Instead of
making ear techniques for the
Same price that you concrete everything. Apparently the drones are made of plastic and the
detectors don't pick up plastic.
In the United States, the B-2s, etc., are kept under cover. They're in hangars. There, indeed, they are.
outside, but they are protected.
The vehicles are protected by tires, a measure implemented by Ukrainians at the start of the war, particularly in Belarus. They were dropping grenades, and they hoped by putting tires that the grenades would bounce off. That's why you see tires on the wings of these planes that are being hit. And since the Russians don't have the means to put them in storage or in hangars, they have to try to protect them. But they're lacking electronic warfare on the front. They never imagined that drones...
Especially since they weren't expecting it.
Here, these are drones that are supposed to fly 10 kilometers, so there has to be a pilot right next to them. And that he didn't anticipate. So there was definitely a remote control system that was in the truck, operated from very far away. They didn't expect a Ukrainian pilot to be just 10 kilometers away.
Listen, it's just a few seconds. A Russian soldier who was surprised to see drones landing on his airfield.
Everything is destroyed.
So I think it's really very short. In the original version, he still adds, "This is crap." No.
But
On LCI, we're elegant. It's
less elegant.
Sorry, if you'd left it in Russian, we would have understood. No, but that's the surprise effect. That's what you were saying. There was a complete surprise effect.
Yes, a surprise effect, especially a technical surprise effect. That is, at no point did they expect to see small first-person view drones coming at them. At most, they might have expected to be attacked by long-range drones. They had planned for that.
Volodymyr Zelensky says there were 117 drones, each requiring an operator. Those drone operators, where were they? But anywhere in the world.
That means there's no need at all to be on the territory. No, absolutely not. Since on each of the trucks there was a transmitter, it was actually the remote control. 10 drones are taking off from the truck, but there are also 10 internet-connected remote controls. And then remotely with the Russian telephone network, and remotely from France, from Ukraine, they could control it. The Russian telephone network works well. Well, I don't know about that, but yes, apparently. No, but this time it worked.
And so, the only equipment that needed to be brought on site were the drones themselves.
It's the drones.
They were hidden.
The Ukrainians had time to evacuate due to the positioning of the enemy, which had been there for over 24 hours or had just arrived. Ukrainians are transparent about their method and location because once it's done, they've already left. To aim well and contribute to the element of surprise, meaning that we expect rather. That's it. The
Nighttime attacks by long-range drones, and then here it's a daytime attack with small drones. And is it?
Did it go down because of the internet? Was it failing? Near their bases, they used a Starlink system. They moved.
Starlink?
Inoperative on Russian territory. Let's focus on the preparations. Look at these images that help us understand how these drones made the first part of the journey by truck.
In any case, these kinds of small modules were assembled on Russian territory. This photo made it possible to geolocate the location of the warehouse. That's why, when Zelensky said it afterwards, we had confirmation of the exact place. In the Chelyabinsk region, right across from a local Federal Security Service complex. We know the size of the drones, we know their payloads, we know the chips that were used, because there are already leaked photos of the debris showing that these are Russian phone chips that were bought locally. So that means there are hundreds of phone chips that were bought without anyone noticing. Once again, in terms of intelligence, that's still something quite astonishing. The containers shown are regular containers with only 20 centimeters of space above them, as visible in the image. Which are the hiding places for the drones, but underneath you can put diapers, food or whatever you want. That allows you to cross the country undetected without showing up on checks. When within 10 kilometers of the target base, open the roof and the device will launch autonomously. So everything is remote controlled, and there's a self-destruct mechanism to destroy the truck at the end so as not to leave any traces. Even though they ultimately revealed all the images themselves.
Listen to this witness who was on the scene.
War has broken out in Olenia. It's hard to see, but there's smoke behind that forest right now.
The truck is parked right at the entrance, which is most interesting.
We're on the highway, right next to the river. There's a bridge right there. Look.
The truck is parked at a gas station in Olenia.
The driver arrives, he's running all over the place. Drones come out of his truck and fly toward Vysoky. The highway police stopped the driver. He told them that he was told to come to this place and that they
Would meet him. He
arrived. The drones started to take off one by one.
shots.
Gunshots from machine guns were just fired.
Are firing the...
Missiles, too.
Years ago, this would have seemed like science fiction. In Michel Goya's scenario, a truck arrives, opens, and drones emerge
To come out,
from being listened to.
that's true, it's a thriller, but this,
That's never been done before, so
no, it's totally new. It's totally new to have a strike campaign against bases using only drones, and apparently built right inside enemy territory with 3D printers. It's totally new, of course.
And then the deliveries to the gates of these bases are made by people they've recruited locally, who, moreover, won't be bothered. Since they were Russians just doing their job as truck drivers, so once they arrived, they had an appointment at the gas station. Don't worry, someone will come. At 2 o'clock sharp, he arrives. The doors open and it's over. Just perfect. You
see this other sequence where you can clearly see the way the shots are fired. They can patiently aim at plane after plane, seemingly undisturbed. It's this sequence where the drone takes its time above the successive planes. And that's exactly what I understand. It carefully takes its time aiming at it with precision.
in front of us, we can actually see that there's the first drone that had already hit the target that was in front of us. From our elevated position, we have a clear view of the entire scene. The pilot observing this is attentively watching. Which planes haven't been destroyed yet, so they can go to the aircraft that's still intact. 5 planes are lined up. The first 3 are destroyed, so he's going straight to the last one. They have the time, they have the numbers, they have the mass. And indeed, why rush to go hit again a second time on the plane that's already destroyed? It's better to look around us and see if there isn't another plane around. And they know them very, very well.
These planes, so
They know.
exactly which part of the aircraft they need to touch to make it inoperative and make them catch fire like that. They publish photos, including of the security service of Ukraine commander, with images of these aircraft with red circles on the vital points in the most critical spots of these aircraft. That means each pilot knows exactly which part of the plane he's going to target. Where's the pilot? I didn't understand that part.
The drone pilot can be located anywhere, whether in Ukraine, France, or elsewhere. All that is required is an internet connection. People are still looking at Xavier Teitelman, because I'm not insured. What were you doing this morning? It was my son's birthday. I'm innocent. Do you have an alibi? What we see here, you see there are red crosses on the left wing of this Tupolev 95. That corresponds to the kerosene tank, and by hitting that spot, they are sure to ignite the fuel inside, or to hit the spars that run the entire length, so it's actually irreparable. And so when the planes are filled with fuel as well, you inevitably have a plane that is destroyed.
But isn't it ultimately a better operation, even from a military standpoint, than the invasion of the Russian region of Kursk?
To go about it that way?
After Kursk, the Ukrainians had to stay, which was difficult for them.
There are 2 wars. The close-range war where the front must hold. The Russians took 8 months to retake Kursk instead of invading from the Donbass, which was already effective in exhausting them. That's a positive outcome. The fact is, having a long-distance war and the current situation are 2 completely different types of wars.
Are 2 types of operations: operations to conquer or defend territory, and strike or raid operations. These are complementary operations. The problem for the Ukrainians is that on the ground, they have a lot of difficulty retaking territory, planting flags on cities. On the other hand, they can strike hard at the Russian rear. So that doesn't change the situation on the front, but it's still a very strong blow that's been dealt. It boosts morale, and it's widely used, obviously, in the media. When
They blew up the flagship.
it was also a big victory. No, it was a Neptune missile. Yes, it was a great victory too, a great victory.
Will this permanently handicap Russia in its operations here? Or at least...
It depends. Once again, it's an extraordinarily hard blow that's been dealt. But regarding operations in Ukraine, it doesn't change much. Indeed, we shouldn't forget that. These are the planes the Russians use to launch a large part of the cruise missiles that are targeting Ukraine. So maybe it has decreased, and still, I'm not sure, the deep strikes on Ukraine. But on the front line, it doesn't change much. What changes is rather the strikes on the immediate rear of the Russian troops. On the depots, command posts, and similar targets, it will slow down operations, but the text is incomplete.
morale of the troops. Still, it's when...
That's still quite a blow. Well,
Of course. No, but of course, no. But you have to clearly understand that these planes are used 94% of the time to strike civilians. So here, we're saving civilians, we're preventing hospitals and power centers from being targeted. And indeed, if a third of the fleet, for example, is inoperative tomorrow, that means you have a third fewer missiles, since these planes are being used at 100% of their potential. The most challenging missiles to launch and intercept are the Kitch 101C. Shad drones, intercepted up to 75% of the time, will be left on the ground, while the hardest missiles to intercept remain. There will be fewer of them falling on Ukraine.
Let's read the Russian reaction, since, as you pointed out earlier, and there is a Russian confirmation that is...
Still interesting.
We understood that they are. In the Russian media, it's not making the headlines, but in any case, they acknowledge it as the effect. In the regions of Murmansk and Dirkaut, several aircraft caught fire following the launch of drones from a territory located in the immediate vicinity of the airfields. Participants in the terrorist attacks on military airfields have been arrested.
I don't see how. The Ukrainians were so transparent about their method that they even used Russian truck drivers to bring them to the site. One of them was killed. One of the trucks exploded because they intercepted it, actually, one of the 5 trucks. I don't believe Ukrainians intercepted it at all. The drivers had no knowledge of what they were transporting. That's why precisely the example of the one where there's the witness who says, but the guy, he's concerned about drones emerging from his truck upon arriving at the gas station for his meeting, revealing the driver's beliefs. We can intercept these drivers, but they're not...
Sir Xavier Dittelman received a question from a friend who admires him but is somewhat skeptical. The friend wants to know who wrote to him. Is it really? While these planes are historic, did they still serve any practical purpose in battle?
Ukrainian battlefield. They are the only vectors for the...
Air-to-ground missiles.
Cruise missiles. There are glide bombs that are launched with the Sukhoi 34, and there are cruise missiles that are launched. Tupolev 9522 and 160 are the only planes capable of launching nuclear bombs. When Russia loses 10-20% of their forces, especially when they only have 20 to begin with, losing even 2-5 is a massive blow to their operational capability. But Russia was looking to make replacement planes because these planes are completely outdated. And in particular, the program is the Perspektivny Aviacyjnej Kompleks Zdalnej Awiacji, and the Perspektivny Aviacyjnej Kompleks Zdalnej Awiacji is a failure. The A100 program, which aimed to replace the A50 radar, has been cancelled due to its failure, leaving no alternative.
It's hard to imagine Putin remaining inactive. What will the Russian reprisals be? The other day's weather. That's not really his style. So there were already a number of drone and missile strikes last night, 500 drones and missiles. Russia is already engaged in a continuous nightly war effort, by the way. Michel...
that's already the case. I mean, that's already the case. It's already every day, so what more can they do? The plan has changed from sending 200 drones to sending 300 instead. The problem is that something needs to be done. We have to respond quickly. There has to be a connection to the event. And in such a short time, what can they really do that's meaningful? In reality, not much. We discussed it. They might bring out a missile. We must attempt to alter how we respond. They can always do the same thing, meaning send drones, send missiles.
After the Kerch attack, he began bombing Ukrainian energy sites. There were indeed...
80 missiles were launched a few days later, I think. Salvos of about 80 missiles. Missiles, sometimes ballistic or cruise missiles, and about every week or every 10 days. So it was actually this repetition that was painful. Now, they don't have the means. They launch more salvos of 80 missiles. They launch salvos of hundreds of Shahed drones. But it's still not the same destructive capacity. And from time to time, they fire a few dozen ballistic or cruise missiles. But it's not the same anymore. There's a higher frequency. It's every day. But overall, it's less powerful than what they used to do back then.
Just for your information, the planes that were partially destroyed are indeed planes, as Gallagher said, that were returned or supplied to Russia by Ukraine. To pay for gas or because of security guarantees we gave them? What was the date? June 1st marks the anniversary of the retrocession of those planes, signifying their return to their original owners.
It's true that there's still a difference when you add it all up. I was going to say it's like nitpicking over what it cost Ukraine, knowing that each of these drones costs what? A few $100s versus the price of the Russian planes that were damaged, lost, or rendered unusable. That's why the Ukrainians, quote unquote, had fun calculating that it's 17 billion. I don't know
How they do it?
their calculation, but they're talking about A-50, the planes A-50. The image hasn't been made public yet. These are planes that are worth at least $300 to $350 million each. There's a lot of talk about
costs in terms of value, but actually maybe it's just the operational cost. Russia would pay up to $50 billion to buy back these planes as they are absolutely essential and indispensable for their war.
Today, let's pause for a moment on one of the aspects that it seems is directly related. These are the attacks on trains. And here we're in the Bryansk and Kursk regions, so at the gates of Ukraine, but on the Russian side. And these are railway bridges. The images bear witness to that. That were destroyed. 2 trains derailed. And obviously there's still a strong probability that it's connected. Michel Goya.
Yes, of course. Given the state of Russian infrastructure, it's not completely impossible for accidents to happen, but having 3 at the same time becomes frankly suspicious. But, of course, it's not the first time either that the Ukrainians have sabotaged infrastructure inside Russian territory. As I was saying earlier, the difficulty with this type of operation is bringing large amounts of explosives to the site. So going into Russian territory with a ton of explosives and managing to place it, because you can't just put it anywhere, and placing the charge at a critical railway point. Where are the protections? You have an entire army in Russia dedicated to the railways, to managing the railways. The guards are stationed at critical points such as bridges. There, too, it's an ability for the Ukrainians to carry out operations on Russian soil with impunity, which is quite astonishing. That's part of the game, too. There are the material effects, and then there are the psychological effects. Look, we're able to come onto your territory, and basically we do whatever we want.
With Ukraine's ability to strike anywhere in surprising ways, you think that everything would have been opened up.
But especially when it comes to railways, once again, these are strategic targets being hit, because here we're in the area that brings equipment to the front. Recall that about a year and a half ago, they also attacked the railway line connecting North Korea to Europe. They targeted not only the tunnel, but also the bypass track, and that delayed the delivery of the 3 million buses that were supposed to arrive by almost a month and a half. That's one reason why the Russians failed in their Kharkiv offensive in April last year. Let's remember that.
They went all the way to the other side to urge the Russian Federation to block the trains that come, that bring the equipment.
The attack was in the Irkutsk region of Russia, not far from North Korea, and close to the military base that was also attacked. So the Russians, does that mean the Ukrainians are capable of reaching Irkutsk?
No, but wait. 2 days ago, there was a sabotage operation in Vladivostok, located 0 miles away on the Sea of Japan. On the other side, the farthest point from the Ukrainian front. Even there, it hasn't been claimed. But it was indeed on a base where the military took part in operations.
In Ukraine, at
Mariupol in particular.